The air in our house that summer felt thick enough to choke on, heavy with unspoken things long before my mom left for the weekend. But I never imagined the silence she left behind. The space filled only by me and my dad could curdle into something so dangerous. My name is Lily, and what happened when it was just the two of us in that suffocating heat didn't just blur lines. It threatened to shatter everything I thought I knew about family, about safety, about myself. This is the truth of it, as raw as I can bear to tell it. What you're about to hear is Lily's deeply personal and unsettling account. Welcome to Hidden Love Stories, where we share true narratives that explore the most complex and often challenging facets of human relationships. Before Lily continues, we have a quick reminder. We've noticed that over 90% of our viewers watch our videos but aren't yet subscribed. If you believe in the power of sharing difficult truths and find value in content like this, please take just a second to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. It helps our community grow and allows us to continue bringing these important, often hidden stories to light. And if Lily's courage in sharing her experience resonates with you, please consider giving this video a like. Your support is invaluable. Given the nature of Lily's story, we must issue a strong viewer discretion advisory. This narrative explores extremely sensitive and taboo themes concerning familial relationships and profound boundary violations that may be deeply disturbing or triggering for some individuals. If you are sensitive to such topics, or if this subject matter could impact your well-being, we urge you to protect yourself and choose not to proceed. Here at Hidden Love Stories, we aim to create a space for understanding difficult realities, but your emotional and mental safety is always our utmost priority. Now, with that understanding, let us return to Lily as she recounts the events of that summer. It was one of those suffocating summer afternoons where the heat just clung to your skin and made the air inside the house feel like it hadn't moved in hours. The sunlight poured in through the windows in hazy, almost tangible streaks, and every fan in the house was spinning at full speed, but it did little to truly cool the oppressive atmosphere. I had just come back home for summer break from university, and for that particular weekend, it was just me and my dad, Mark. My mom, Susan, had gone out of town to visit her sister for a few days, leaving the two of us alone in the house. At first, it felt kind of nice, almost a novelty. Dad and I had always gotten along pretty well. He was generally warm, calm, and possessed a dry sense of humor that could make me laugh even when I didn't particularly feel like it. We hadn't had any real time alone like this in a while, and a part of me, the part that remembered easier, simpler days, was actually looking forward to it. But underneath that, there was also a strange, unplaceable sense of anticipation I couldn't quite decipher, like I was waiting for something to happen, even though I had no idea what that something could possibly be. We had lunch together, made the usual small talk about my school, his work, and random little things going on around the house. But by mid-afternoon, I began to notice something a little different about him. Dad was acting more playful than usual. Not in a creepy way, at least not overtly at first, but just unusually relaxed, joking more frequently, smiling more broadly. It caught me off guard. He seemed lighter, almost boyish. "You know what we should do?" he asked suddenly, his eyes brighter than I'd seen them in a while. "Watch a movie, something classic." "Sure," I replied, glad for the distraction from the heat. "Got anything in mind?" He grinned, a sly, almost teasing way he had. "How about something a little spicy?" I raised an eyebrow, a small knot forming in my stomach. "Spicy? Like food spicy or—" He laughed, a short, knowing sound. "Romantic spicy, just for fun." I chuckled, trying to convince myself he was just kidding, making a slightly off-color dad joke. All right, sure, sounds interesting. We ended up picking an old romantic drama, one of those slow-burn movies filled with long, lingering stares between the leads and a palpable undercurrent of emotional and sexual tension. At first, I was absorbed in the story, the way the characters' feelings for each other built gradually. But then I started noticing something else, something that made my skin prickle. It was the way Dad kept glancing at me during the more steamy scenes, not outright staring, not in a way I could immediately call out, but definitely looking. And it didn't feel like a joke anymore. My heart started to beat faster, a frantic bird trapped in my chest. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was being paranoid, reading too much into innocent glances. But the awareness, once it took root, didn't go away. I felt every inch of the couch between us, hyper-aware of every little movement he made. I tried to ignore it, tried to force my focus back onto the movie, but the tension in the room grew thicker, more charged, with every passing minute. It felt like the air itself was crackling. Then came a sharp knock at the door. Both of us jumped slightly, startled out of the strange bubble that had formed around us. Dad glanced at me, and for a loaded moment, neither of us moved. Then he motioned with his hand, a quick, almost dismissive gesture. "Stay there. Let's just see who it is." My own heart was pounding as I crept over and peeked through the narrow front window. It was only Mrs. Gable, our elderly neighbor from across the street, holding a familiar wicker basket in her arms. I felt my shoulders drop with a wave of profound, almost dizzying relief. I opened the door. "Hi, sweetie," she greeted cheerfully, her kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "Baked too many cookies again. Thought I'd bring some over for you and your dad." "Oh, thank you, Mrs. Gable," I smiled, forcing a brightness I didn't feel. "That's so incredibly sweet of you." Dad appeared behind me then, his voice overly cheerful, almost booming. "Evelyn, you always know just what we need, don't you?" She chatted with us briefly before heading back home, and once she was gone, the air in the house felt different. Again, he sat back down on the couch, closer than before, I thought, but I could acutely feel his eyes on me, even when I wasn't looking directly at him. "Lily," he said, his voice softer now, more intimate than it had any right to be. "Do you ever wonder what it would be like if it were just us?" I turned to him slowly, my body stiff with a nameless dread. What do you mean?" He paused, his gaze searching my face, making me feel pinned. "I mean, if Susan wasn't here, just you and me." My breath caught in my throat. The room seemed to tilt. "Dad, that's kind of a weird question." "I know," he said quickly, a strange eagerness in his voice. "I know it sounds wrong, Lily, but I don't know. Lately I've been feeling things I probably shouldn't be feeling." I didn't know what to say. I couldn't speak. Part of me, the sensible, horrified part, wanted to run screaming from the room, from the house. But another part of me, the part that had noticed his glances during the movie, that had felt that strange illicit thrill in the air, froze me to the spot. Before either of us could say another word, before that loaded silence could stretch any further, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a message from Mom. "Hey, honey? Change of plans, heading back early. Be home in a few hours. See you soon." So I showed the screen to Dad, and his face immediately changed, shuddered. The strange openness, the unsettling intensity vanished. "We need to just act normal," he said, standing up abruptly, his voice suddenly brisk, all business. "Everything's normal. Okay. I nodded numbly, my mind reeling. The moment, whatever it had been, was gone, shattered. But it had happened, and the memory of it, the feeling of it, was hanging there in the space between us like something heavy, unfinished, and deeply, deeply wrong. When Mom walked through the door later that afternoon, smiling and cheerful, completely oblivious, everything on the surface looked perfectly normal. But inside me, nothing felt the same. She asked, her voice bright, "So, what did you two get up to while I was gone?" "Just watched a movie," Dad replied, his voice unnervingly calm. Too calm. I forced a nervous laugh. Yeah, something really dramatic. She smiled and moved on, completely unaware of the suffocating tension she had just walked into, the unspoken, ugly thing that now lived in our house. But I felt it. And I knew, with a sickening certainty, that he felt it too. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the fan blades circling endlessly above, I kept thinking back to that moment on the couch, his words, his eyes, my own terrifying, confused reaction. Something had irrevocably changed between us. And I wasn't sure we could ever go back. I wasn't sure I even knew who we were anymore. The days that followed passed in a strange, disorienting haze, the kind where everything looks normal on the surface but feels fundamentally different, tainted beneath. The oppressive summer heat lingered, pressing against the windows just as heavily as the new, suffocating silence that had settled between my father and me. We didn't talk about what had happened that afternoon, not directly. Not at all, really, but it was there, an invisible, pulsating entity in every room we shared. It was in the way he avoided lingering too long in the same space as me, in the glances that came too quickly and then looked away even faster, as if burned. In the disturbing way, I felt my own pulse quicken with a mixture of fear and something else I dared not name whenever we passed each other in the narrow hallway. It was like walking through a house filled with invisible, live wires. Every step felt like it could trip something, unleash something terrible. Mom, thankfully, or perhaps willfully, didn't seem to notice anything was off. She was back to her usual self, chatty, affectionate, busy planning dinners and asking about my classes for the upcoming semester. And I did my best to play along, to be the daughter she expected, to laugh at the right moments, to nod when I was supposed to feign an interest I couldn't truly feel. But it all felt like a performance, like I was an actress in a poorly written play about a happy family. Because deep down, something had fundamentally shifted, something no one else could see, something ugly and terrifying. One night, a few days after Mom had returned, we were all sitting together in the living room, ostensibly watching TV. Some lighthearted sitcom was playing, and the room was filled with the sound of easy laughter, at least from her. I was curled up on one end of the couch, trying to lose myself in the manufactured joy on the screen, and Dad was sitting on the other. At one point during a lull in the on-screen conversation, I felt his eyes on me. It was a familiar feeling now, that prickle on my skin. When I dared to look over, our gazes met. Just for a second, but it was long enough. My breath caught. There was something in his eyes I couldn't explain, couldn't bear to decipher, like recognition, like a shared illicit secret, like longing, like guilt. All of it swirled together. I looked away quickly, heart hammering, pretending to be utterly focused on the television. But that moment hadn't been in my head. It was real. Horribly real. Later that night, long after Mom had gone to bed, I found myself wandering back into the silent living room, hoping the cool, still air might help clear my tormented mind. To my surprise, Dad was still there. He was sitting on the couch in the dim light, a half-empty glass of whiskey clutched in his hand, staring into nothing. "Oh," I said, stopping in the doorway, my voice barely a whisper. "Didn't think anyone was still up." He looked up, slightly startled, his eyes shadowed. "Hey!" "Yeah, couldn't sleep." I hesitated, then walked over, a strange compulsion pulling me forward, and sat on the chair across from him. For a few charged seconds, neither of us said anything. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken words. Then he spoke, his voice low, gravelly. "Lily, about the other day." My throat tightened. "Yeah," I said softly. "I've been thinking about it." It was an understatement. It had consumed my every waking thought. He stared at his glass, swirling the amber liquid. "It was a mistake. I shouldn't have said anything. I shouldn't have felt." "Was it?" I asked, the words escaping before I could stop them, a desperate need for something overriding my fear. "I mean, it felt different." He looked at me again then, really looked, his gaze intense and unblinking. "It did," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "Didn't it?" The air in the room shifted, becoming even more charged, like a storm building beneath deceptively calm skies. There were so many things I wanted to say, to ask, to scream, but the words tangled in my throat, choking me. Then, my phone buzzed on the coffee table beside me. I jumped slightly and reached for it, a confusing mix of thankfulness for the interruption and a profound frustration washing over me. It was a message from a friend. "Want to come hang out for a bit?" "We're at Sophie's." I stared at the screen. Part of me, a reckless, terrified part, wanted to stay, to see where this dangerous conversation with my dad would lead. But another part, the part that still clung desperately to some idea of normalcy, of boundaries, knew I needed space, needed to escape the suffocating atmosphere of that room. I think I'm gonna head out," I said, standing up, my legs feeling unsteady. "Just for a little while." He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable, lost in shadow. "Okay. Be safe." I left the house with my heart pounding in my chest, unsure of what I was running from, or more terrifyingly, what I might be running toward. Later that night, when I returned, the house quiet and dark, I found him still awake, sitting in the same spot on the couch, now attempting to read a book, though it lay open, unread, in his lap. He looked up as I walked in. "How was it?" he asked, his voice neutral. "Good," I replied, trying to sound casual as I sat beside him, a little closer this time. "Did you miss me?" I added, attempting a light, joking tone that fell utterly flat. He chuckled softly, a low rumble in his chest, but there was a weight in his eyes, a sadness that said more than his laugh ever could. "Maybe a little." I smiled, a trembling, uncertain smile, but inside I was spinning, lost in a maelstrom of confusion and a strange, unwanted excitement. Then came another interruption, a sharp, sudden knock at the door. We both turned, startled, our private, charged world instantly shattered. Mrs. Gable again, predictably cheerful as ever, holding another basket of her famous cookies. "Hope I'm not disturbing," she chirped from the porch. Dad stood up, his movements a little too quick, greeting her with a charm that felt utterly forced to me now. I watched his eyes flick between her and me, a silent, anxious communication. Something unspoken, something dangerous, was still lingering there, thick and undeniable. After she finally left, her cheerful chatter fading into the night, I turned to him, my own heart racing. What were we talking about before? He hesitated, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. Lily, I don't know if we should talk about it. Why not? I asked, my voice quieter now, a desperate edge to it. It's already out there, isn't it? We can't pretend it didn't happen. He sighed, a sound of deep weariness. Okay, but whatever we say, whatever we explore, it stays between us. Absolutely between us. I promise, I said, without a moment's hesitation, the gravity of that promise lost on my confused younger self. He looked at me then, his eyes dark and serious. I feel something between us, Lily. I don't know what it is. I don't know why it's happening, but it's there. And I can't ignore it anymore. I feel it too, I whispered, the admission surprising even myself, a confession that felt both terrifying and liberating. He reached for my hand then, and the moment our fingers touched, a spark, a jolt, something electric and forbidden shot through me. It was wrong, so incredibly, fundamentally wrong. It was complicated. It was terrifying, but in that moment it also felt undeniably, overwhelmingly real. The days that followed felt like walking a precarious tightrope with no safety net below. My dad and I had crossed an invisible yet monumental line. Spoken words that couldn't be unsaid, shared a touch that still tingled on my skin when I allowed myself to think about it. We never mentioned it directly after that night, not in so many words, but everything had changed. We became experts at pretending, at the careful dance of normalcy. At breakfast, we were just father and daughter again, passing the syrup, talking about mundane chores or plans for the day. When Mom was around, we laughed at her stories, complimented her cooking, played our parts in the family charade. But behind the forced smiles, beneath the surface of our carefully constructed everyday life, something deeper, darker, and far more potent stirred. Something that neither of us could bring ourselves to name, yet both of us acutely felt. It was maddening, this silent, shared secret. One evening, as I sat in my room, scrolling mindlessly through my phone, trying to escape the thoughts that plagued me, I heard the sound of laughter drifting from downstairs. I peeked out my door and saw my parents sitting at the dining table, talking and laughing like nothing in the world was out of place. But it didn't feel normal to me anymore. It felt like a scene from a play, well-rehearsed, perfectly timed for an unsuspecting audience of one, my mother. Then Mom called up to me, her voice cheerful. "Lily, honey, come down and join us." I hesitated, a knot tightening in my stomach, then forced a smile onto my face and walked downstairs. As I joined them at the table, Dad glanced at me. Just a brief, fleeting glance. But in that split second, I saw it again. That spark, that forbidden, unspoken understanding that now only we shared. It was a silent acknowledgement of our secret world. We played a board game that evening, something simple and nostalgic from my childhood. Mom laughed easily, sipping her wine, completely at ease. Dad was animated, more so than usual, his jokes a little louder, his smiles a little wider. Each time our hands brushed reaching for a card or a game piece, I felt a jolt of illicit electricity. He looked at me, his eyes holding mine for a fraction of a second too long, as if he remembered everything we had said, everything we hadn't, everything that now throbbed between us. That night, long after Mom had gone to bed, a familiar pattern repeated. I wandered into the living room, feigning a need for water, hoping to clear my head, but perhaps subconsciously seeking him out. And there he was, again. On the couch, another glass of whiskey in hand, the dim light casting long shadows across his face. He looked up as I entered. Couldn't sleep? I shook my head, perching on the far end of the couch, my legs curled beneath me. You? Same, he said, his voice low. The silence between us wasn't awkward anymore. It was familiar, heavy, yes, but achingly, dangerously familiar. You've been different lately, I said softly, stating the obvious, testing the waters. He didn't answer right away, just swirled the amber liquid in his glass. Then, so have you. We both knew what we meant. The unspoken hung heavy between us. I wish things were simpler, I added, almost to myself, a wistful, impossible desire. He nodded, his gaze distant. I do too, but the truth is, Lily, I can't stop thinking about that night, what we said, what we felt. I swallowed hard, my own thoughts mirroring his. Me neither. He set his glass down on the coffee table with a soft thud and leaned forward slightly, his eyes, intense and serious, locked on mine. Do you ever wonder what would happen if we didn't stop? If we just let this be what it is? I couldn't answer. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. The idea was terrifying, a monstrous taboo. But a treacherous part of me, a part I was ashamed of, also found it intoxicating. Just then, my phone buzzed on the table, a sharp, unwelcome intrusion. I grabbed it quickly, half grateful, half annoyed by the interruption. Be there in 10. Couldn't wait any longer. Aunt Carol. I read it again, confused. Aunt Carol? Mom's sister? She was supposed to be staying with Mom for the weekend after this one, and she lived hours away. Why was she coming back now, unannounced? I showed the text to Dad. His face went pale, a stark contrast to his earlier intensity. Why is she coming now? He whispered, his voice tight with alarm. I don't know, I managed, my own unease growing. And then, as if summoned by our panic, there was a knock at the front door. We both stood, frozen, staring at each other. Then through the glass panel beside the door, we saw her silhouette, Aunt Carol dragging a suitcase, a bright, oblivious smile on her face as if nothing in the world could possibly be wrong. Surprise! She called out cheerfully through the door. I just couldn't wait to see you guys. Dad muttered under his breath, a sound of pure dread. This can't be happening. We opened the door and let her in, forcing smiles that felt like grotesque masks. She hugged both of us tightly and launched into a cheerful, rambling monologue about how the unpredictable weather had ruined her original plans, how she missed Mom terribly, and how she impulsively decided to come early. All I could think, with a sickening lurch in my stomach, was, we are trapped. She moved through the house like she owned it, a whirlwind of energy, dropping off her bags in the guest room, chatting incessantly about her job, her cat, her new miracle skincare routine. Dad and I tried to keep our faces neutral, our interactions brief, desperately trying not to look at each other for too long, terrified that our eyes would betray the illicit secret that now bound us. But the dangerous energy between us hadn't disappeared. It was just buried now, smothered under Aunt Carol's loud stories and her relentlessly cheerful, oblivious voice. Later that night, once she had finally gone to bed, Dad found me in the dimly lit hallway outside my room. We need to be careful, Lily, he whispered, his face etched with worry. Extremely careful. I nodded, my own fear a cold knot in my stomach. I know. But we can't just forget what's happening between us, can we? We can't just pretend it doesn't exist. I looked into his eyes and saw the truth I didn't want to admit, the truth that had been chasing me all summer. We were in deep, far too deep, This wasn't something we could just erase or wish away. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice barely a breath. He took a shaky breath. We take it slow. We keep it quiet. And we figure it out, together. The next moment, we heard Aunt Carol's voice call out from behind the guest room door, startlingly close. "You two still up? Everything all right out there?" We jumped apart like guilty children caught sneaking out after curfew. "Just chatting, Carol," Dad called back, his voice a little too loud, a little too forced. "Just saying good night. Well, get some rest, you two." Big family breakfast in the morning. We both murmured a hasty good night and retreated into our separate rooms. But sleep didn't come easily that night, if at all. There was something undeniable between us now. Something dangerous, something real, and it was only getting harder and harder to hide. The next few days were an excruciating balancing act, one that felt more impossible, more fraught with peril, with every passing hour. Aunt Carol, true to her word, stayed longer than originally planned, turning what was supposed to be a quiet, if tense, time into a series of noisy family meals, late-night card games, and endless meandering stories. To her, and seemingly to Mom, everything seemed perfect, a picture of familial bliss. But for Dad and me, nothing felt the same. Every time we passed each other in the kitchen, every time we shared an accidental, loaded glance across the dinner table, I could feel it, the tension. The memory of shared whispers and forbidden touches, the ever-present, dangerous temptation. It was always just below the surface, a silent, throbbing secret. And it was only getting harder to hide, harder to pretend that the ground beneath our feet wasn't cracking. One afternoon, while Carol and Mom were out shopping, a rare moment of quiet descended upon the house. I found Dad sitting at the kitchen table, ostensibly reading the newspaper, though his gaze seemed distant, unfocused. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, my heart pounding, unsure if I should say anything, if I dared to break the fragile, illusory peace. Then, I took a hesitant step closer. "Dad," I said softly, my voice barely a whisper, we need to talk." He looked up, his eyes immediately finding mine, and slowly set the paper aside. "About?" he asked, though his expression told me he knew exactly what about. "You know what about?" I replied, my voice trembling slightly despite my efforts to control it. He nodded slowly, a resigned look on his face, and gestured for me to sit across from him. "I can't stop thinking about it," I admitted, my eyes fixed on the worn grain of the wooden table, unable to meet his. "And I don't know what that says about me, about us." He leaned forward, his voice low, almost a murmur. "It says you're human, Lily. And you're not alone in this. I think about it too, all the time." "What if she suspects something?" I whispered, the she hanging in the air, referring to Mom, to Carol, to the whole world. "She might," he said quietly, his gaze dropping to his hands clasped on the table. "But she doesn't know anything for sure, not yet." We sat there in a heavy, suffocating silence, the weight of our unspoken feelings, our shared transgression pressing down on both of us. What if we just explored it?" I said finally, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. A desperate, reckless suggestion born of confusion and a strange, undeniable pull. Just to see what it means, what it is. His eyes widened, a flicker of shock, then something else. Something unreadable. "Lily," he started, his voice hoarse. "Just a kiss," I said, the words almost breathless, shocking myself even as I uttered them. "Just one. Then we'll know if it's real, or if it's just some crazy summer daydream, something we imagined." He hesitated, a war clearly raging within him. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. Just as we both leaned in, the world narrowing to the space between our faces, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway, growing closer. "Hey, you two okay in here?" Aunt Carol's voice called out, cheerful, but alarmingly close. We jumped apart, our faces flushed, guilt and panic warring within us. "Yeah," I said, my voice at least an octave higher than usual. "Just talking." She poked her head into the room with a wide, knowing grin. "Well, we're doing movie night again tonight, kids. And you better not bail on me this time." "Wouldn't dream of it, Carol," Dad said quickly, his voice strained. She smiled, oblivious, and walked off. But the moment between us, that fragile, terrifying moment of decision, had shattered into a million pieces. Later that night, long after the movie had ended and everyone else had gone to bed, I sat alone in my room, my body trembling, trying to catch my breath, trying to make sense of the maelstrom of my emotions. I couldn't sleep. I didn't know if I even wanted to anymore. Then came a soft, hesitant knock on my door. I opened it to find Dad standing there, his expression a tumultuous mix of conflict and a strange, unsettling determination. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice low and urgent. I nodded, my own heart a wild drum against my ribs, and let him in. We sat on the edge of my bed, the room dimly lit by the moonlight filtering through the curtains. The silence between us this time was louder, more pregnant with unspoken possibilities than ever before. "I know this is wrong," he said finally, his voice a low, pained whisper. "So wrong. But Lily, I can't keep pretending it's not there. This feeling. Neither can I replied, my own voice equally hushed, a confession of my own turmoil. "But Dad, we can't keep hiding like this. Carol almost walked in on us. Mom could be next. It's not sustainable." He took my hand in his then, his fingers surprisingly warm, sending a shiver through me. "Then maybe we stop hiding." I froze, my eyes wide. "You mean, tell her? Tell Mom?" He nodded, his gaze unwavering, intense. "She deserves to know the truth. If we're going to do this, whatever this is, it can't be a secret forever. It's not fair to anyone, least of all her." My throat felt tight, constricted. "But it could ruin everything. Her, us, the whole family." "I know," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of that knowledge. "But Lily, we already crossed the line, didn't we? In our hearts, in our minds, even if not fully. Now we have to decide who we are going to be on the other side of it." I nodded slowly, my heart racing, a terrifying sense of inevitability washing over me. The next morning, after a strained, almost silent breakfast, we asked Aunt Carol to give us a moment alone with Mom. She looked surprised, a question in her eyes, but thankfully, she didn't press it and excused herself to make a phone call. Mom sat on the couch, looking from me to Dad, a flicker of apprehension dawning on her face. "Is everything okay?" Dad and I sat across from her on the armchairs. He reached over and took my hand again, his grip gentle but firm, a small anchor in the storm I felt raging inside me. "Susan," he said, his voice quiet but clear, "there's something very difficult we need to tell you." Mom's tentative smile faltered, her eyes widening slightly. "What is it, Mark?" "You're scaring me." I could barely speak. My voice cracked as I whispered the devastating truth, the words feeling like shards of glass in my mouth. "Mom, Dad and I, we have feelings for each other. Not the way we're supposed to." The silence that followed was absolute, a crushing, deafening void. Mom stared at us, her face paling, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and a dawning, horrifying understanding. Then, slowly, she stood, her movements stiff, almost robotic. I never thought I'd hear this, she said, her voice quiet, trembling, laced with an unbearable pain. From you, Mark. From either of you. I'm so sorry, Susan, Dad said, his own voice thick with emotion as he also stood. We never meant to hurt you, but it happened. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over and tracing paths down her pale cheeks. I need time, she said, her voice barely audible. Time to think. Time to breathe. She walked away without another word, leaving us sitting alone in the suddenly cold, sterile living room, our hearts pounding in unison, our lives, all of our lives, forever changed by the truth finally spoken aloud. We had done it. The secret was no longer a secret. It was out, raw and bleeding, in the open. Now, all we could do was wait and see what came next from the ruins. Thank you for listening to Lily's incredibly difficult and courageous story here on Hidden Love Stories. Sharing such truths takes immense bravery, and we are here to listen without judgment. What are your thoughts on this complex situation? How does one even begin to navigate the aftermath of such a revelation? We invite you to share your reflections respectfully in the comments below. If this story has moved you or made you think, please consider giving it a like and subscribing for more narratives that explore the often challenging and hidden aspects of human relationships. Your presence and engagement help create a community of understanding. We hope that by sharing these stories, we can all learn more about the complexities of life and find solace in knowing we are not alone in our struggles.